So, good morning, everyone. It's really nice to see you here today. How much we need to be together in this cold weather. So this morning, I'm going to read our mission statement. These aren't just words that we voted on, but words we try to live by every day. Our mission is working toward a more just and inclusive society. Our congregation supports spiritual growth and service with open doors, open minds, and open hearts. Open doors for welcoming our diverse island communities and visitors. Open minds for exploring different ideas and beliefs. And open hearts for deepening our connection with others and ourselves. This morning, I'm happy to be welcoming Daniel back to our Zoom pulpit. Reverend Daniel Lawlor is excited again to join the Nantucket Unitarian Universalist congregation. He's a former middle school teacher from Fall River, Massachusetts, and a development director in Oakland, California. Daniel is a proud graduate of Boston University School of Theology. He served as a ministerial intern at the First Church of Boston from 2019 to 2021. There he was ordained in December of 2021. Congratulations on that, Daniel. He appreciates our wonderful hospitality here at the Nantucket Unitarian Universalist Meeting House from his recent seminary days, and he reminded me, I'm sorry I missed it, that he was our guest speaker just before the pandemic in 2019. So most recently, Daniel is the co-director of the Unitarian Universalist Ministry for Earth, supporting our UU congregations in the practice of environmental justice. Drawing on his family's example of engaged religious practice and community work in Rhode Island, Daniel is inspired by caring communities and honored to witness the joys and sorrows in our faith. So today, Daniel and his wife, Yumi, call Brooklyn home, and that's where he's coming to us today. So welcome, Daniel, and just want to say hi to everybody. If you want to unmute yourself to do that.
No, absolutely. Thank you. Hello. It is an honor and a gift to be with you this morning. I'm seeing Susan and Peter and just having so many wonderful memories of their hospitality from the visit in the before times, before all the disruptions we've known in the last 2 years. But just coming back to this space, even in this digital space, it just gives me such commitment and energy to know that your community, which had so much love and light at that time, is still gathering regardless of the difficulties. And that just, it makes me excited to be with you this morning. So I'm so happy and honored to be with you.
Thank you, Daniel. It's really wonderful to have you and to have this interconnected community within our Nantucket UU, but also the web that goes out all over the country. Okay, so it's time to light the chalice. And as Ray lights the chalice, please join me in saying the words printed in your order of service. I believe you know it, but in case you don't, with this flame, we renew our commitment to justice, peace, and compassion. Sweetie, bring the chalice into. Okay, here we go. Unmute yourself. Hold on. Sorry. I'm still getting used to this Zoom thing. All right. Now that you're unmuted. With this flame, we renew our commitment to justice, peace, and compassion. Okay. Now we're going to go over to Nigel to sing our affirmation, and you may stay unmuted.
Alrighty, here we go. We do our best to sing together, even though there's a lag.
From all that dwell below the skies, let faith and hope with love arise. That was lovely. So it's now the time in our service where we greet one another. But before we do, I want to ask if anyone's new today or returning after a long hiatus. If you'd like to unmute yourself and introduce us to you, we'd love to greet you in good UU Meeting House style. And I'm looking around and seeing if there's anyone new. I'm going to go to the next page. I think, as someone would say, it's just us chickens. Am I missing anyone? All right, I don't think so. So if you'd like to unmute yourself and say hello to everyone, that's time.
Hi there.
Hi, everybody.
Good morning.
Morning.
Hi, Paula.
Good morning, John and Ira.
Hi, John.
Paul,
Hi, Susan,
Hey,
Peter.
Allison.
Hey, Joanne.
Oh, hi, Joanne.
Hi, Ann.
Hi, John. Hi, Carol.
Joan.
Buenos dias.
Hi, Sean.
Hi, Nancy.
Hey, Allison.
Hi, John.
Hi, Nigel.
Hi,
Dad.
There's Michael. Good.
Hi, Allison.
Hi, Allison. Hi, Al.
Morning, Frank and Linda.
Hey,
Hi,
Carl.
Hey, Polly.
Tara
Ian
Babel.
Stevens. Hi.
Hi,
The Tara Babel.
Hi, Judy and Mike.
I'm going to ring my bell. I think
Oh, I
it's
like
time for us to send it over to Nigel for our first hymn. And it's one
I'm
of my
going to mute.
favorites.
Sorry, I'm going to mute all before you do that.
Oh, good.
Yes, it's time for our first hymn, and this I'll remind everybody that we do stay muted for the singing of the hymns. These are recorded during the week by the virtual choir and myself. And our first one today is Love Makes a Bridge, number 325. And as we've been starting to do lately, I have a video here for us to watch with the words on the screen if you would like to sing along in your space. And as always, you can imagine singing together, even though we can't do it. Everybody's singing the same thing at the same time from different places, lifting our voices up.
Love makes a bridge from heart to heart and hand to hand. Love finds a way when laws are blind and freedom banned. Love breaks the walls of language, gender, class, and age. Love gives us wings to slip the bars of every cage. Love lifts the hopes that force and fear have beaten down. Love breaks the chains and gives us strength to stand our ground. Love rings the bells of wanted birth and wedding day. Love guides the hands that promise more than words can say. Love makes a bridge that winds may shake and not destroy. Love carries faith through life and death to endless joy.
Thank you, Nigel and choir. That was beautiful. I'm going to send it over to Daniel for the poem and the meditation.
Thank you so much. That was a beautiful hymn. The poem I want to offer this morning is from one of our Unitarian Universalist ancestors, Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, who is known in both the Unitarian and African Methodist Episcopal traditions for her work as an abolitionist. She herself had been enslaved and worked for the freedom of others during the Civil War and its aftermath. She was a teacher. She was involved in so many reform efforts and really found ways to cross boundaries and keep connections both with her African Methodist Episcopal heritage and with her chosen Unitarian faith. And this poem is called Songs for the People. Let me make the songs for the people, songs for the old and young, songs to stir like a battle cry wherever they are sung. Not for the clashing of sabers, for carnage nor for strife, but song to fill the hearts of all with more abundant life. Let me make the songs for the weary amid life's fervor and fret, till hearts shall relax their tension and careworn brows forget. Let me sing for little children before their footsteps stray, sweet anthems of love and duty to float over life's highway. I would sing for the poor and aged when shadows dim their sight, of the bright and restful mansions where there shall be no night. Our world so worn and weary needs music pure and strong to hush the jangle and discords of sorrow, pain, and wrong. Music to soothe all its sorrow till war and crime shall cease, and the hearts of all grown tender circle the world with peace. And that poem from the 19th century just still echoes so true to me today. But Songs for the People, Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. I want to offer a meditation, a time to slow down, a time to center down. And this is a moment to just take a breath. I am going to read a meditation from the Reverend Dr. Howard Thurman, who was actually one of the mentors to Martin Luther King and many leaders in the mid-20th century civil rights movement. But Thurman sort of has an ongoing and sort of hidden influence in a lot of lives, whether academic or community organizers or writers. Thurman's meditations and poems sort of have seeped almost quietly in the background of a lot of influential creative individuals who've asked us and beckoned us to stand up for the good. And this meditation is how good it is to center down, and particularly on a cold day like today, how good it is to be present. How good it is to center down, to sit quietly and see oneself pass by. The streets of our minds seethe with endless traffic. Our spirits resound with clashings, with noisy silences, while something deep within hungers and thirsts for the still moment and the resting lull. With full intensity we seek, as the quiet passes, a fresh sense of order in our living, a direction, a strong, sure purpose that will structure our confusion and bring meaning in our chaos. We look at ourselves in this waiting moment, the kinds of people we are. The questions persist. What are we doing with our lives? What are the motives that order our days? What is the end of our doings? Where are we trying to go? Where do we put the emphasis, and where are our values focused? For what end do we make sacrifices? Where is my treasure, and what do I love most in life? What do I hate most in life? And to what am I true? Over and over, the questions meet in this waiting moment. As we listen, floating up through all the jangling echoes of our turbulence, there is perhaps a sound of another kind, a deeper note which only the stillness of the heart makes clear. This note moves directly to the core of our being. And in that silence, perhaps our questions are answered, our spirits refreshed, and we move back into the traffic of our daily round. We move back into the traffic of the daily round with the peace of the eternal in our step. What is the end of our doings? Where are we trying to go? How good it is to center down. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Daniel. I loved both the poem and the meditation, and the history behind both of those authors. So thank you. It's now time in our service for joys and concerns. We call this part of our theology the seventh principle, which is the interconnected web of existence of which we are a part. Knowing that our joys and sorrows connect us all, we leave this time in our beloved community to share with each other. So if you have a joy or a sorrow to share, please raise your hand and or unmute yourself, and this is your time. So for all the joys that were expressed, we ask those joys grow more joyful because they were shared in this circle of friends. And for the sorrows shared and unshared, we ask that they grow easier to carry because brought here to this loving community. Let's just take a moment for all the joys and concerns. And it's time for our next hymn. So Nigel, I'm sending things over to you.
Very good. Our middle hymn for this month is number 55, Dark of Winter.
Dark of winter, soft and still, your quiet calm surrounds me. Let my thoughts go where they will, ease my mind profoundly, and then my soul soft and still, bring your quiet to me. Darkness soothe my weary eyes, that I may see more clearly. When my heart with sorrow cries, comfort and caress me, and then my soul
Wow, I'm really liking having those lyrics up there, Nigel, so thank you. It's time for Daniel's reflection, which I'm looking forward to. So, Daniel, unmute yourself and you're on.
Thank you so much. Good morning. Good morning, all. This weekend for me is, especially as Unitarian Universalist, a time to pause and slow down and reflect. And my invitation to us today and going into this year of 2022 is to slow down and connect, to slow down and connect, to slow down and connect. There's so much happening in our world. There has been all the time, but it feels like in these last 2 years, we have a cascade of day-to-day changes, of tragedies immediate and far, of overwhelming demands and undergirding disappointments, accompanied with great moments of elation and hope. And sometimes it can feel daunting. How do we stay in a consistent rhythm when so much feels like it's falling apart and yet so much feels so close? This Martin Luther King Jr. memorial on Monday invites us to slow down and perhaps think about some of the origins of this holiday. In many respects, Dr. Martin Luther King is memorialized because of the work that Coretta Scott King did after his passing to make sure that Dr. King's movement was not forgotten. And one of the unfortunate things that's happened and how in different ways, especially how corporations help elevate Dr. King is the person. Dr. King always was Dr. King in a movement and Dr. King in community. I want to invite us today to do two things. One, to look back at the origin of what became the civil rights movement in Montgomery, and then to pause to connect that challenge to our time. And to remember, in 1955, there were so many different ways people entered and connected and fostered a movement for change and equity and compassion. And today, there are so many ways that we can embody justice, equity, and compassion in our world and with one another and in our souls. I had the privilege to visit Montgomery about 2 weeks before the world shut down in 2020. I was with a group of seminarians who visited Birmingham, Selma, and the state capital of Alabama. And Montgomery, in some ways, felt like Harrisburg, Pennsylvania to me, if you've ever been there. You know, not a huge city, not a small city, about 120,000 people. In 1950s America, Montgomery was 63% white, 37% Black. And it was haunted 90 years after the Civil War, haunted by the legacies of slavery. The capital city was primarily dependent on state administration, academia, agriculture, and to a degree, aviation, due to federal Air Force bases located in the city. Reverend Ralph Abernathy noted that in the mid-20th century, most of the jobs for African Americans in the capital were service-oriented. The median family income among African Americans in Montgomery in 1949 was $908, according to Troy Jackson, while in industrializing Birmingham, the median income was $1,609. So this was not the most prosperous city in Alabama. In addition to the relatively limited economic opportunities overall, Montgomery was deeply, by law and social pressure, divided by prejudice, racism, and segregation. Montgomery had once been the epicenter of the failed and defeated secession of the Confederate States, and wealthy white old families maintained social power well into the 1950s. Even transportation was subject to the rules of strict segregation and the violent defense of it. As Joanne Robinson of the Montgomery Women's Political Council once observed, 3/4 of the riders are Black, yet we are arrested or have to stand over empty seats. The Women's Political Council was an African-American organization formed in part because after World War II, an interested group of Black women academics at Alabama State College were refused membership in the Montgomery League of Women's Voters. As Coleman and other authors lament, the system of white supremacy in Alabama at mid-century relegated Blacks to a separate and subordinate sphere in virtually every area of public and private life. Yet there were challenges developing across that social order. After World War II, and that notion of the double V, the victory abroad and the victory against segregation at home, that cultural ferment was having impacts in the South and in the United States overall. In 1944, the US Supreme Court outlawed all white primary elections in a case Smith versus Allwright. Building on this pressure, in 1948, President Harry Truman signed Executive Order 9981, which mandated desegregation of the United States Armed Forces. Troy Jackson notes, integrating the armed forces provided an oasis of growing inclusion in Montgomery at Maxwell Air Force Base. Alongside this rising local civic and federal pressure against white supremacy, you saw, while ultimately not successful, efforts at unionization at factories in the South. And this system was challenged not just by Northerners, not just by legal courts, but by religious and community leaders within Montgomery's Black community. There is a tiny church, Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, where Martin Luther King Jr. eventually would become the pastor. And this church literally is on the same street as the Alabama State House. So right, if you go to Montgomery, at the center of the state capitol, there is a giant, looks larger than the Massachusetts State House, giant state capitol building. And just right in front of it is this tiny little brick building, the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. And Dr. King's predecessor after World War II was Reverend Vernon Jordan, who was a very brave man who preached sermons in the 1940s with titles like "It's Safe to Murder Blacks in Montgomery." And those were the titles that would be put on the sign in front of the church facing the state capitol in this bastion of white supremacy. In the late 40s, numerous members of the Women's Political Council experienced rude, aggressive, or violent treatment by white passengers or white bus drivers in Montgomery. Joanne Robinson recounts that in 1949, while at a new position at Alabama State, a white bus driver screamed at her, quote, as if I was a dog, demanding she give up her seat and leave the whites only section. And she wrote, I leaped to my seat, afraid he would hit me, and ran to the door to get off the bus. I got mad and realized I was a human being and just as intelligent and far more trained than that bus driver was. These assaults against women continued throughout the late 40s and into the 50s. And the Women's Political Council began to say, how can we change this? The preaching environment that Vernon Jordan and other pastors started to offer after World War II, the commitment that was embodied in the curiosity and the organizing tenacity of the Women's Political Council was slowly seeding the groundswell of change that would happen. In many ways, And historians often say the arrest of Rosa Parks was simply, quote, the last straw. On the day of Parks' arrest in December 1955, Joanne Robinson wrote, "The Women's Political Council will not wait for Miss Parks' consent to call for a boycott of city buses. On Friday, December 2nd, the women of Montgomery will call for a boycott to take place on Monday, December 5th. Beginning Monday, this is an amazing story. Beginning Monday, December 5th, 1955, through December 21st, 1956, the Black people of Montgomery boycotted the segregation bus system, refusing to any longer participate in a system that was perpetuating harm. In Joanne Robinson's initial appeal to the community, she stated, "You can afford to stay off the bus." The boycott was called by the will of thousands responding to the demand of the Women's Political Council for Just Treatment. Historian Burroughs writes, the WPC was without question the largest, best organized, and most assertive civic organization in Montgomery. The WPC, union officials like Edie Nixon, officers of the local NAACP, including Rosa Parks, small business leaders who owned gas stations and cars, local ministers who felt the pressure and opportunity to coordinate the mass protest. This was the groundwork that began the Montgomery Improvement Association. One estimate suggests that this carpool of riders, according to work done by historian Coleman, over the course of the year, 60,000 rides to 30,000 people. Despite suffering assassination attempts, bombing of churches, threatening phone calls, death threats, arrest, jail, and violence. For over a year, everyone from gas station owners to church owners to musicians at local nightclubs telling people to keep up with the boycott, all of these people worked together to sustain the supporting weekly mass meetings that were held at churches with the logistic support for carpools and relief funds. Through the work of these weekly mass meetings to share information and keep up people's spirits and coordinate rides and relief, the churches became, in the words of Dr. King's mentor, overt centers for the rallying of the spirit. Throughout this year-long boycott, the community manifested common ground and discipline, asserted autonomy and independence, and witnessed to their faith and conviction of citizenship, most articulately and most well known through the vision and voice of Dr. Martin Luther King, but this was a movement of thousands. And there's a story I heard when I was in Montgomery that there were many times in that year, because Dr. King faced multiple assassination attempts, houses were burned, churches were threatened to burn. It was an awful time. There was a lot more violence than I think we've carried into the collective memory of it. And supposedly a story is that at one point, Dr. King was very despondent. Will this continue? And an elder came up to him afterwards and said, Dr. King, my feet are tired, but my soul is rested. My feet are tired, but my soul is rested. And that this, in so many ways, from the stories I heard from people, captures the spirit of a movement for change, where it's not just one figure. The figure arises from the movement. The figure doesn't create the movement. The voice is not what gathers people. The people gathered themselves and then elevated those who could offer the stories to inspire and connect. And that brings us to now, in the time we're in, with our own challenges, our own unique intricacies and particularities, and moments of fear. And just as we heard in Joys and Sorrows, even just yesterday in a house of worship, there was a hostage situation when people were gathering to find joy and hope and connection. This is a scary time we're living in. And we are not alone. We're not. The movements of the past that have connected everyone from the gas station owner to the nightclub singer to the church secretary to the political legal advocates. Those are movements that have entry points for so many people in so many different stations of life. The movements for change that have worked in the past create ways for multiple people to connect across background and with a commitment to a vision. On the first night of the Montgomery bus boycott, there was a reading from Psalm 34, and one of those lines in Psalm 34 verse 10 is, "The lions may grow weak and hungry, but those who seek the Lord lack no good things." The lions may grow weak and hungry, but those who seek the Lord lack no good thing. We might be in a time where power is changing between climate crisis and flooding and fires and political systems. We're not sure what is happening. There is so much uncertain. Yet, if we stay committed to justice, equity, and compassion, if we ask ourselves in our lives, in our circle of connection, what can we do to stay sustaining and hopeful and embodying those practices? We are able to stay faithful to an alternative way. And that's why slowing down is so important. That's why taking moments to figure out how will our soul be rested, or how will our spirit be rested, or how will our bodies and minds be rested is so critical. Because without the cup of tea every day looking out the window, without 15 minutes of meditation every day, without prayer, if that's what brings sensitivity and grounding, without a consistent habit of maybe journaling every day, what is that 15-minute, that 20-minute, that centering down that you can do? Without that slow down, we can't connect with our best selves. And if we can't connect with our best selves, we can't connect with others in a way that is healing and inspiring. It's paradoxical, but to change the world, we need to slow down, to know ourselves. And then we can really know each other. And then we can create the roots and connections and movements that can transform the world. It's happened before. And we're in a moment where it can happen again. So today, just as your chalice burns for justice, equity, and compassion, I invite us to slow down and connect, to slow down and connect, to slow down and connect. May it be so.
Oh, thank you, Daniel, for that very timely and meaningful and inspiring sermon, and the reminder to center down, especially these days. So it's now time for the offering. As always, I ask you to be generous. To keep this interconnected web alive, it takes all of us giving of our time, our energy, our thoughts and spirit. And yes, it also takes resources. This is your time to contribute to keep the UU and all that the UU Meeting House is and means thriving. Thank you. And I'm going to send it over to Deirdre.
I've just done a little summary in the chat, as we've been doing.
Okay, thank you, Deirdre. So, Nigel, I believe you have a great Chopin piece for us.
I do, yes. Today's offering is a really neat piano piece by Frédéric Chopin, or I like to call him affectionately Freddie. And I have arranged this for piano and bass. Thanks to the joys of modern technology, I recorded the piano accompaniment a couple of days ago, and I can play the double bass for you now.
Thank you, Nigel. That was beautiful. And I think we can go right into our final hymn, right?
Yep, that's how we usually roll. Our last hymn today is number 331, Life is the Greatest Gift. And this was a familiar tune to me. I don't know that this congregation is familiar with it, but these lyrics actually really spoke to me this week, so I hope you enjoy them.
Life is the greatest gift of all the riches on this earth. Life and its creatures, great and small, of high and lowly birth. So treasure it and measure it with deeds of shining worth. Mind is the brightest gift of all, its thought no barrier mars. It seeks creation's hidden plan, its quest surrounds all bars. It rains the wind, it chains the storm, it weighs the outmost stars. We are of life, its shining gift, the measure of all things. Up from the dust our temples lift, our vision soars on wings. For seed and root, for flower and fruit, our grateful spirit sings.
That's a great one. Daniel, we're going to go over to you for our blessing.
Absolutely. This is a piece from Dr. King from a sermon he delivered called The Man Who Was a Fool. Something should remind us before we can finish eating breakfast in the morning, we are dependent on more than half of the world. We get up in the morning and go to the restroom and reach for a sponge that's come to us from the Pacific Islands. Then we reach over for a bar of soap, and that's given to us from someone in France. And then we reach up for our towel, and that's given to us by someone from Turkey. And then we go to the kitchen for breakfast, getting ready to go to work. Maybe this morning we want to follow the good old American tradition and we drink coffee. Well, that's poured into our hands by someone from South America. Or maybe we are desirous of having tea, and then we discover that we are having something poured into our cup from China. Or maybe we want cocoa this morning, and then we discover that's poured into our cup from West Africa. Then we reach over for a piece of toast, only to discover that's given us at the hands of an English-speaking farmer, not to mention the baker. And so before we finish eating breakfast in the morning, we are dependent on more than half of the world. It really boils down to this, Dr. King wrote, that all life is interrelated. We are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied into a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. And as Unitarian Universalists, as we affirm the inherent worth and dignity of every person and the interdependent web of life that we are all a part, may we remember we are connected. May we live in a way that shows we are connected, and may we be that connection to those we meet in the days and weeks ahead. May it be so.
Wow. Thank you, Daniel. And thank you all for being here. We're going to have our postlude from Nigel.
Do we extinguish the chalice first?
Oh, yes. I was so excited to hear that. I forgot. Thank you. So, as Ray extinguishes the chalice, please unmute yourselves and say these words: carry the flame of peace and love until we meet again. All right. Carry the flame of peace and love until we meet again. And now it's time for our postlude.
And our postlude today is written by a man from Canada, Christopher Norton, who is enamored of the music of Scotland. And it's called The Highlands.
Oh, thank you, Nigel. You took me to the Highlands. And thank all of you for being here, especially to Reverend Daniel Lawlor. We're going to chat for a few minutes, and Daniel has agreed to stick around for just a little while to take any questions or comments.